little bit louder? Well, good afternoon. Welcome to the second of Professor Jean-Yves Lacoste Richard Lectures. As you know, Professor Lacoste is speaking to us on the theme From Theology to Theological Thinking. And in effect, he is telling us a story, a complex story to be sure, of the changing relations between philosophy and theology, and something new perhaps in the future of theology. A future that is coming to be present even now. Yesterday evening, we heard Professor Lacoste tell us about the relations between philosophy and theology in the ancient world. An ancient world already being transformed by the advent of Christianity. We might have thought that in those days there were two things, philosophy and theology. The one discourse being directed to the natural world, and the other discourse being directed to the supernatural world. But no, Professor Lacoste insists that there was no two-story universe in the first centuries of the Common Era. The ancients practiced something called Philosophica, or lived philosophy, as Professor Lacoste translates it. Today, we might think of studying philosophy as something abstracted from life. For the ancients, though, one was converted to Philosophia and lived a life contemplating the cosmos, the good life, and everything concerned with them. Saint Augustine, we were reminded, did not think of himself as a theologian, but as a Christian philosopher. Early Christianity, then, was perhaps more open in its discussion within its own ranks and between itself and other groups, philosophical and religious, than we might have supposed. Of course, there were moments of apparent closure, the formulation of the Nicene Creed, for instance. But having guidelines does not imply closure and totality. There's a great deal of freedom in playing tennis, but one needs a net in order to play it. Perhaps so also in the practice of Christian philosophy. It is good to have an open mind, Chesterton said, but one must be able to close it upon something in the end. In his deepest life, Professor Lacoste is a phenomenologist. That is, he is concerned with the many ways in which phenomena give themselves to us. We might ask ourselves, as he does, how God gives himself to us. The Christian tradition has often assumed, perhaps without warrant, that God gives himself to us as something to be known, by way of proof, say. Or one might say that God gives himself to us as something that can be quasi-known, by way of faith. For it is quite common, and all too common, for people to think of faith as a weaker form of knowledge. Yet, Professor Lacoste, especially in La Phénoménalité de Dieu, tells us something else, something that Saint Augustine had already intimated. He tells us that God does not give himself to us by way of knowledge. He does not give himself to us by way of feeling. He does not give himself to us by way of a secondary knowledge. Instead, God gives himself to us as lovable. We come to know God only in the sense that we love who God is. God reveals himself to us by proposing himself to us not by imposing himself on us. Not the least of what God gives us is a certain discretion in his dealings with us. The medium of his self-revelation is his love for us and our love for him, and not anything binding, compelling, or inexorable, such as proof and duty. Professor Lacoste does not reject the distinction between faith and reason, a distinction that has been very much in the air since the encyclical Fides et Ratio and long before it. Rather, he urges us to see that reason can be a richer mode of engagement with God when it incorporates freedom in our relationship with God. There is no love that is not free. This evening, Professor Lacoste takes us from the ancient world to the medieval world. He proposes to speak with us tonight on philosophy, theology, and the academy. He assured us yesterday evening that this evening we shall find a corpse. Let us be attentive, and we shall discover whether the corpse is in philosophy or theology, or perhaps even in the academy at large. Please join me in welcoming Professor Lacoste.